Hello and welcome to a special bonus edition of the Gale on S Rugby podcast. You could be saying that, mid World Cup, why would he be coming on now? To talk URC, of course. Not in the way you'd have imagined, to be honest. I was planning on doing a season preview that'll wait for a few weeks. As I'm too busy at the moment. But we will talk URC tonight because some big news came out about a potential merger between the best league of the URC and the Gallagher's Premiership. So I've decided to get two people to hop on board to talk about it with me. So David Cordial and Huw Griffin, welcome back onto the podcast. Huw is the only one to have featured in two bonus podcasts now. It's there two very ad lib podcasts, but live and let live. For people who haven't seen, an article went out in the Daily Telegraph today titled British and Irish Super League. That's doing a lot of heavy lifting there. Plan discussed and could include South Africa initially. I think it's fair to say this is a URC expanded and enhanced in some regards. So, what exactly is it? It's basically, just that URC plus the English side. Now, a piece in this that I don't know is probably worth stating. It says it's understood initial discussions have already taken place at the World Cup. Although there has been this rumor floating around for quite a while, you do wonder if this is just the first formal conversation as opposed to kind of throwing it around. It's understood there are also moves for greater collaboration between the URC, Premiership, Six Nations, and Lions to pool backroom resources, which is something that I'm sure won't go down well. As we move on through it, one solution has been put forward for an FA Cup style knockout competition involving clubs to the top 14, I believe as a Champions Cup kind of replacement. Champions Cup is already kind of killing itself softly, though, as we know or as we've discussed on this podcast. They do go on to state the Premiership currently consists of 10 clubs following the demise of Worcester, Watson, London Irish, while the URC has 16. So
We're
the next
currently doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence.
heavy lifting is going to be the buzzword of the night, folks. I think we can already tell. The next stage of negotiations is to look at how integration of the two leagues would work, which is understandable. Now, as myself and Huw have discussed, and myself and David discussed way back when, the URC already has previous for having conferences or having shields and having structure to their league. So I don't think this is something that would be as much of a stumbling block, be it conferences or shields or whatever. The piece by Gavin Mayers does go into broadcasting rights, talking about the need to get rugby on one broadcaster again, which again, you can kind of blame the EPCR for that one, and the EPCR era of European rugby in some regard. Then there is talks about, how much the Six Nations unions are going to get a say, because obviously the RFU and the Premiership probably not seeing eye to eye, I think it's fair to say. The kind of URC is standalone in its own regard, and then they go on to talk about the Anglo-Welsh League, the Anglo-Welsh Cup, and all that in the piece. You can read it. It's over at the Telegraph if you have subscribed. I have subscribed. Wink, wink. Definitely didn't get screenshots off of subscribers. So I will come to let's just go with the stereotype. Huw, you're Welsh. You must be thinking, oh, we need an Anglo-Welsh league.
So I'm unusual. I have been out and open with my view that an Anglo-Welsh league at this moment in time would be an extremely bad idea. I think the quality of rugby that is played in the URC is the highest outside of the New Zealand derbies in Super Rugby, and the very, very top teams in the top 14. For me, I mean, it's as you said, it's the URC saving English rugby. Basically, this is the URC teams asking to join. The way the Telegraph have phrased it is very face saving. Oh, it's a British and Irish league that might include the South Africans and Italians. It's the URC and the English teams are joining it. It's something that you yourself, Kaylin, have suggested is been on the cards for a while. I've also been joining some dots. You look at the Ospreys having a game in London. There was talk about the West Country Derby being played in Cardiff this year, and some other things dotted around the place as well. So it feels like we've slowly been being warmed up to this over the last few months. And like I said, with the financial difficulties in England and the URC actually growing as a tournament, especially with the addition of the South Africans. Now, the URC is not the financial wonderland. It's not like everybody in there is making money. They're absolutely not. But no club has gone bust at time of recording in the URC.
Yes.
So, and so yeah, that's kind of what it really is, as you said.
Yeah, David, I'll come to you next. You're very much a pro. URC equals best league enthusiast. I don't know where you got that idea from. But what's your thoughts on this?
It's an interesting concept as a general idea. The concept of this kind of amalgamated British and Irish league, possibly with the addition of obviously South Africa and Italy, geographically it makes a lot of sense. That being said, it has made a lot of sense since the dawn of professional rugby. I was struck by there was a quote, or there was a comment in that, I think it was a quote, there was a comment in that Telegraph article on the subject that up until quite recently, the Premiership's response to the concept of joining the URC was, I think, literally no, no, no. And it did strike me that changed quite rapidly once 3 of their clubs had folded. And
it's amazing what you do when your house is on fire, kind of situation.
I mean, this is it. Necessity is the mother of invention, and you don't want to wallow in the dissolution of any of those clubs, particularly clubs that were historical stalwarts like Wasps, and that's people's jobs and people's livelihoods, and you hate to see that happen. But it's not a surprise that the result of that is that they have become slightly more amenable to coming to the table. I suppose from a URC enthusiast's point of view, my 2 concerns would be, number one, South Africa have gone quite well so far. There is obviously a geographical concern there, and that getting to and from South Africa and Europe is not a short trip. It's probably not been handled as well as it can, sponsorship dependent, but kinks like that can probably be worked out with scheduling. My real number one concern would be Italian rugby. Now, the article did mention that this would probably involve South Africa and Italy as well, but I think Italian rugby has not produced at test level necessarily the success that a lot of people would have expected, but it has gotten a lot better. And I think it's gotten a lot better primarily because of more investment in the 2 clubs, and those 2 clubs being more competitive. There was a season not that long ago where Benetton almost knocked Munster out at a quarterfinal level, and then
Rainbow Cup reigning champions,
and then obviously they're the Rainbow Cup reigning champions, and I think it is predictable, if a little unfortunate, that when they win things like that, their star test level 10 then goes off to join a top 14 club. But at the same time, I mean, in the inception of Ireland at professionalism, we had people like Keith Wood playing most of their career in England, and it ends up benefiting you because they can bring back what they learn at those leagues. So
where you said that Owen Farrell playing in Thomond Park every night will benefit English rugby because he was playing against proper teams.
Yeah, they might have a chance of winning a World Cup fun. But look, it's not the worst idea in the world. I think my concern would be for the clubs that are currently in the more stable league, that they would have assurances that the stability will be maintained and that they won't be put in a position where they're potentially dragged down by the more financially unsecure league. And then beyond that, just a scheduling thing of you bring in 10 more teams, we're gonna have to restructure the thing, and the calendar's already pretty packed. And I suppose actually my other main concern was that, as much as that league might make a lot of sense, it might seem really like a good idea, we'd want to then look at how that would ever impact Europe. Because if you suddenly have a league that is the URC plus England, that is really just Europe minus France. And I think the dominance of French teams, they won the Challenge Cup and the Champions Cup this year, will
2 years in a row.
will warrant people having an interest in them anyway. But it does mean then that Europe is really just the URC plus France. So yeah,
it's kind of that anyway, because the English don't last very long in Europe these days.
They don't.
I didn't say it this time, folks. It wasn't me this time.
And no, look, to be fair, 2 English teams have won it since the last time an Irish team has won it. So, but yeah, no, yeah.
Like the Wallabies have won 2 World Cups since Ireland won a World Cup. They haven't.
Swings around a bit.
Yeah, this is just the way things work. There is kind of the pros and cons to everything. So I might start with fans, because at the end of the day, sport is nothing without fans was definitely meant by all sporting organizations during COVID. They definitely meant that. Definitely. It's probably a big talking point because, as I was saying to Huw earlier, if you're a Munster fan, say, or a Leinster fan, the idea of going to Leicester every year, or to Bath, or maybe even to London, is appetizing, to say the least. It is. It's more appetizing than maybe going to, Newport or Glasgow, which I know, David, you are going to both, but that's just reality of it. Like, these are new places to go to. The flip side of it is there is the kind of geographical implication. There's going to be a lot more traveling. Like, they'll want to have a format that means provinces can play each other. So how does that work with England if, like, South Africans and the Irish and the Welsh and the Scots want to play each other? You have more English teams. Like, I can't tell if fans are going to like this or not. Because if I'm hesitant, and I'm all for change, because I think the current rugby model is flawed. Like, there is question marks. And even Huw, like, the parts of Wales, as we joked about, would be very much we should join up with England, but there are flaws to that too. Like, when the Ospreys play Leicester or something, they're still not getting a full house. Like,
No, I mean, there's going to be a lot of people who have to put their money where their mouth is if it happens, where they say, "Oh, we need an Anglo-Welsh league." Without covering too much conversation at once, the URC would obviously need to be heavily restructured to enable this to happen, because obviously you can't have a straight league format with, at time of recording, 26 teams in it.
26, yeah.
So it would either
work.
It would either be conferences or like a Premiership and a second division, which is
I think the way to go, and maybe you can shoot me down because we'll jump onto the format in a minute. I think you go top heavy, do you? Or do you go conference? Like, you go maybe, so if we're going 26, they won't do 13 and 13 for superstitious reasons. Do you go maybe 12 and 14? Do you go 14 and 12?
Yeah, that's
which split do you go? And then you probably need to reserve at least 1 spot per nation in the top league. So you probably go 14 and 12.
Yes, that's what I do. Like I said, we'll talk about potential formats in a minute, but yes, that's kind of what I would do. I would prefer that to conferences, because how do you do a conference when there's 8 or 10
You'd have to
English
join
teams?
up from the nation. You probably have to go like Ireland, Wales, Scotland, Italy, South Africa, England.
Yeah,
and that's awkward.
And yeah, it doesn't work very well. What was the original question?
Just about the fans and how.
Oh yeah,
how are they going to receive it?
So yeah, some Welsh fans would have to put their money where their mouth is, as you rightly say. In Europe, when we do play English teams, which isn't as much as it used to be, it's actually a bit of a bone of contention this year that Welsh teams aren't playing English teams in Europe, and the French teams aren't coming to Wales. The only teams that Welsh teams are playing in Wales are lower French teams and other URC teams. So the fans will. All the people who say that we do need an English Welsh league, and that it would be the savior and it would be the best thing since sliced bread, we're about to find out in that famous graph.
Yeah.
Mess
around and find out.
Yes, exactly. I don't think, with someone like like Bath Scarlets is a historic game. Gloucester Dragons has a bit of history to it as well because they're geographically reasonably close together. Anything to do with Bristol, obviously, there was a time when half of Bristol's team was Welsh players. So those kind of games, yeah, I can see. Are people going to turn out in their droves to see Sale or Newcastle? I don't know. And again, if we, my personal opinion, if we were in Anglo-Welsh League and we were offered the chance to play Leinster or Munster or the Stormers from South Africa, we'd go, oh my God, yes, everyone would go down to the stadium to watch that. So I think you would find not a particularly high attendance bump.
That's the thing. Like certain countries will travel, but like if you're adding, say, I'm trying to think of Quins, right? Quins are a great club and everything, but like, will they travel to Galway? Or are you just gonna keep having this cycle of home support is kind of more important again? Do you know, like these are the kind of questions. Granted, a lot of Irish fans would like to go to Quins and different things, but there's that cycle. And David, like the other side of it is two Irish lads and the Welsh lad, it's easy for us to kind of get our heads around it. But if you're a South African or Italian, they will have question marks in case they're quick to be kicked out.
Yeah, they will, and I think it's for two different reasons. From an South African point of view, it's because they've just joined and they had to leave Super Rugby to come here. Now there were a lot of problems with Super Rugby as well. Unfortunately for South Africa, they're almost as badly placed geographically. I mean, from that point of view, I do remember, it's just anecdotally that one of Australian Leinster stalwarts is the lock forward Scott Fardy, who said that one of his main reasons for coming to Leinster was because he had a young family and he'd spent an incredible amount of weeks living out of hotel rooms because of the amount of travel involved in Super Rugby. So, the South Africans have that unfortunate location. They've now made this commitment to make a shift from playing in Super Rugby down with New Zealand and Australia to playing up here in Europe. And a lot has gone into that, and they've really committed to it. And credit to them, first season they were involved, they won. Second season they were involved, they were in the final. So they've put a lot into it, and I think there is always that fear of last in, first out. And England and Ireland as a league makes a lot more sense than Ireland. Sorry, I say Ireland. URC in England as a league makes a lot more sense than URC and South Africa. So I can understand that they would have consternations at that point. And then I think the Italian concern would be the one I voiced as well, is that Italy is still a relatively growing rugby nation. I do think they're a rugby nation with a lot of potential. We have a mutual friend who's just sending us videos of his son down at minis rugby in Treviso, and I think there's a lot of potential there if that game can be grown there. But the last thing that will help that is if you suddenly push them down to a lower division. So and then that's not to mention the fact that, as well as Benetton and Zebra being members of the URC, Italy are also a stakeholder in the Six Nations, which all of the other nations in this proposed joint URC British League would also be stakeholders in. So there's a lot of layers to this. I would not want to be one of the lawyers stuck in a boardroom trying to figure out how to structure it. But yeah, there are a lot of competing concerns, and I think from a fan's point of view, I would hope. And look, this is always a difficult one to match with expectations for financial return, particularly when there are investors involved. But I would hope that the overriding goal of a new league or a maintenance of the current leagues is growth of the game. We're just coming off the back of, well, we're not coming off the back of, we're still in the middle of, but a World Cup where we have seen what quote unquote tier 2 nations are capable of when you give them a chance. And I think any effort that we can make to grow the game in our own countries, but then also globally should be the number one goal, and we shouldn't just be looking at including England in a URC. We should be looking at how we can bring in, I think, is it the Black Lions or the Georgian team, or if there is a Portuguese team, if there isn't a Portuguese team, let's make a Portuguese team and grow there from that perspective. But I think it's so from a South African and Italian point of view, I can definitely understand their concerns, that they would have concerns, but I think our big focus should be on trying to expand rather than contract.
And there's probably an element too, as you said, about growing it, that the URC in the last 2 years, say 3 years, when they kind of tried to put it together, they have basically been outward and saying, we're not going to stop innovating. We're going to try and keep trying to find what works. There was talks about, would you have an American team? Yeah, possibly. Would you have a European team? Yeah, possibly. Would you have the English teams? Yeah, possibly. It was always that kind of a like, we're not going to say no to it because we don't know what's down the line. And to their credit, to Martin and I and the URC's credit, that's something you can't say about the English clubs. When they were asked about this a few times, it was always, no, the Premiership's fine. Like, yeah, but it's not.
Yeah.
As we said about the time of recording joke, like, it's not. And at least the URC is open. Like, they're open to having a women's competition, etc. You were going to jump in there. Do you want to?
Yeah, well, it says in the article, doesn't it, that there's a change happening of people at the top, and it's not. It actually says in the article it's not the Blazers anymore. There's more people with new ideas wanted to come in. But the URC has been about survival, hasn't it? I mean, if you go back to when it was just the Celtic League, it was the reformation of Welsh rugby into the region model, and then it brought in the Italian clubs, and then the South African clubs were brought in to help. Partially to help them survive, because they wouldn't have had a home. I think they were going to leave Super Rugby come what may, and they needed a new home. So that's kind of what it is. And now, if England are in the position of needing to survive, then it's part of the URC's DNA. But the part of it that is interesting to me is the comment about sharing resources, because as you say, like, all the member unions are owners, and what that would mean if one of the teams that you referenced there was the Lions. So if South Africa are stakeholders in the URC and the URC are stakeholders in the Lions, it would mean that South Africa are stakeholders in the Lions, even in some tiny way.
Yeah.
That's when
Who'd be a lawyer?
That's when it starts all becoming a big blob, doesn't it? That's when it all starts being, of the tier 1 nations, you've got England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Italy, South Africa. So of like the 10 tier 1s, 6 of them are all in one big club competition. I just on a slightly different note, doesn't that just scream rugby isn't viable?
It does, yeah. Lean on the next guy, and everyone's just leaning on each other in one massive circle. Is kind of the vibe. Or actually, no, I think a better way to do it is Ireland and France both have 2 arms out and are holding on 2 nations each, and the rest are just kind of.
No, I think Ireland and South Africa are holding up most people, and then France are holding up themselves and tier 2. France are holding up tier 2 as well.
That's true. They have a lot of tier 2 players in their leagues.
It's also worth. Yeah, and it's also worth remembering that, like, as healthy as the game is in France, and it does seem to be in like enviable position to have a 14-team internal league, and then also have a secondary league below it. Most of that is funded by wealthy men. It's like the Premiership or the Premier League in England. As healthy as it seems from the outside, it is just money that is generated in other places that is then funneled into rugby. I'm sure they get little bits and pieces out of it, but most of those clubs, certainly the bigger clubs, you think of Racing 92, you think of Toulon, they're passion projects. They're trophy clubs for the people who own them, and that's great if that's what sport is, because at the end of the day, sport is sport. But I think we'd be cutting ourselves if we said that there was like some golden horizon where sport is this self-perpetuating thing. I think it is always going to be something that needs to have extra money pumped into it, and whether that is from private investors or if it is from governments, as long as we can get it, then we should be happy out. But yeah, I think it is always important to remember that as well.
Yeah.
Going back to the analogy a second ago, everyone holding up each other, and then you've got Australia clinging onto New Zealand's leg, and New Zealand are going, "Get off me, get off me."
Yeah, New Zealand would kick everyone off if it meant they got to sit at the highest rung of the ladder.
Which is
England,
mad because I don't think they're that big a. Well, I mean, I think overseas they probably have the benefit of being the All Blacks are probably the jersey that I see the most on people who aren't from the place where that is from. Like I don't think you don't really see people wandering around in Ireland jerseys who aren't Irish or England, etc. But I've seen plenty of Irish people who have All Blacks merch, and I think they market themselves quite well overseas. But like New Zealand is a country of 5 million people. If they didn't have that to rely on, they're not. Australia is a much bigger country now. It has a lot more other leagues inside that are to compete with. But I think the Kiwis would be codding themselves if they thought that internally they were enough to be financially viable.
so just two things. So we've touched on kind of the growth of it and everything. If we're going down, we'll start with TV, right? TV is the big one. Have to get this right. Huw, you talk about it a lot on your podcast about TV rights and different things. What way would you like to see it go, considering the URC's current model versus the Premiership's current model?
So we did talk about this on the Pirate Rugby Pod episode 2, I think. Enda really broke it down really well and explains that if you want every game to be televised, it has to be a pay-per-view. It has to be. And rugby is a niche sport for all, there are plenty of people in rugby who think that rugby and soccer are, equals, or rugby is slightly below. No, rugby is niche. It's not, there is no comparison to be drawn. So it has to be, if you want to watch every game, it has to be on subscription TV. People don't like that. And every time you talk about that, you get people saying how everyone's got different budgets and not everyone can afford that. And which is, you can't argue with. And some people think that it should be some kind of given that it should be free to air and everything should be on free to air. It's not realistic.
I'd probably add in there that in Ireland there is legislation there if they ever wanted to change it and add more provincial games.
Yeah.
At the moment, that legislation is reserved for national team sport, but if they ever did feel like it, they could, and they would have a bit of power then.
Yeah. So in Wales, you can watch a game a week on S4C, which is the Welsh language channel, which has English commentary available. And there's BBC Wales do the Friday night games, I think, most weeks as well. So there will. So I think it would probably be that option of a subscription channel plus weekly free to air games based on what country you're in. So maybe Channel 4 or Channel 5 or ITV or whoever it is in England shows a game a week or 2 games a week of the English clubs, and the same throughout all the countries. The broadcaster that always gets brought up is Amazon. If there is a pay-per-view channel to come in, I would prefer it to be Amazon because I think it is the cheapest at time of recording, and it's a lot of people already have it for other things, whether it's for delivery or for Prime Video or whatever it is. So it would make the sport more discoverable than if it was, say, on a Viaplay or a Premier Sport, which we didn't know existed until the URC was on it. So that's kind of where I'd go. TNT Sport is another option. I would prefer not that, but I think the key thing, I think it's what you were getting at, and I think it's what the article gets at as well. It cannot be divided up amongst multiple subscription broadcasters. It can't be the English clubs are on one channel and the Irish clubs are on another channel and the South Africans are on another channel. It all needs to be in one place that you pay for, and you pay whatever you pay for it, but it can't be divvied up because that just completely defeats the whole point of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They can't afford to go, okay, so here's BT and here's, Sky and here's Amazon and all that. I would be in favor of Amazon. The only thing is their rugby coverage has basically been an extension of BT/Premier. So you'd like to see some sort of change if they were. And as you said, it is the cheapest. They are the most accessible. They have probably the most how do I say, the best value for money, because if you're going to get Amazon and Amazon Prime, you can, get other things. And Rugby
and they've got money to throw at it as well, whereas the rest, would be looking for the URC to justify its own income.
Yeah. I mean, that's what TNT have been doing to the Premiership for years. They've been basically
Yeah.
robbing them in some regard.
Yeah, and I will just say as well on the accessibility thing, this is something Jamie on Rap pointed out, which I didn't think of. For older viewers, something like Amazon isn't that accessible because they're not used to that kind of thing. It would probably be more accessible for them if it was on Sky, because Sky has been around for longer and is part of your TV, and you already know how to use it, and you've already got Sky for something else, football in the UK, or the Formula One or the cricket. So there is no argument to say that Sky would be better. I would be against. Well, I've already got Now TV, so I'm already paying stupid money for that. But it wouldn't be my first choice. I would prefer Amazon.
That's fair. David, I'd let you weigh in there. If it was to go a different direction, which way would you go? And then maybe, because I'm trying to stay out of the Irish hat here and let you take over, how would it look for Ireland, depending on which way they go, in terms of what you'd like to see, and in terms of what the fan would like to see?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. The Amazon route I understand as an attraction. I think they had the Autumn Nation series a few years ago, or possibly still do.
Still do,
And
and the Summer Nation series this year.
Yeah, and it is a great service, and you know, if you're someone like me, you already have Amazon Prime for a variety of reasons, and so it already exists as a service. I hadn't really thought of it there, but Huw makes a good point. They don't need us to justify our existence because Amazon is probably the most profitable company on the planet. As long as you can sell it to them, that is the thing as well. They're going to want something out of it. So, as long as we can convince them that it's a good enough deal, then maybe
we would definitely need them more than they'd need us. Because if we're going for a 26-team league, you have to have a provider who can show multiple games.
Yeah,
and realistically, they're the only ones who could cover to the proper degree.
Very much so, yeah. And I don't know if everyone who doesn't work in the industry knows, but Amazon basically runs the internet now. They have a back-end service called AWS, and basically every website on the planet is based off of their infrastructure. So if there's any online company that can do it, it's them. Sky being more accessible, I do take as a good point, because obviously Sky is more, is it more institutionalized, and you can get it on your TV, I guess. And another level of accessibility, particularly with the times we're going through now, is affordability. And God, Sky is not affordable. It's very, very expensive.
Unless you've already had it for 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. If you've already
factored to leave.
Yeah, exactly. And you can get your 3 months for half price or whatever. So it's more understand. Yeah, but I do think that'll come in time, I think from an Irish point of view, it's tricky, as you said, Caelan. We have legislation in place for free to air. At the moment, we have at least all Irish games, or actually, it's a slight bone of contention. We have 3 out of 4 provinces games are free to air. Ulster's games are not guaranteed free to air. For example, their first game of the season isn't. So it's really just the 3 southern provinces where every single game is free to air on either TG4 or RTE. I think that will be hard to give away, but at the same time, that hasn't been in place for very long. I think it's only been 2 or 3 years. Before that, we had Air Sport, which was a whole other level of awful. So, I think when it comes to club games, week in, week out, if the service is affordable and relatively accessible, people will pay for it. There's been a lot of hullabaloo in this country about GAA Go being introduced, but there are games now being shown that weren't shown before. And are there bigger ticket games that are on that service that would have been free to air before? Sure, because they need to justify their own existence. But if you're going to be showing enough games to cover a league that big, then it needs to be a form of paid service. I think from a free to air point of view, my number one priority would be that, as much as possible, at least domestically. Obviously, if it's Super or the Rugby Championship or something else, that's another question. But when it comes to stuff like the Six Nations, if there's a priority to keep something free to air, I think it should always be the Six Nations, because I think that's how you get people into the sport. That's how you get people into rugby. That's how I got into rugby. So the club game, I think if you make it relatively affordable and relatively accessible, then if we have to pay a little bit to do it, if it's £10 a month, it's £10 a month. And you can build your fan base from there. But I think at least if we can keep the test level stuff and the, you know, Irish stuff or whatever your international games are free to air, then that's how you generate your wider audience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's bad enough already in the UK with the Six Nations being split between the BBC and ITV, not just because it means that you have to watch ITV. But yeah, I just want to point out one thing because I can hear Ender saying it in my head. Amazon currently do tennis, and I believe you do have to pay extra to watch tennis on Amazon. So it's not necessarily given that if Amazon had all of rugby, there wouldn't be a cost difference. You could see like Amazon Rugby being a thing, and it maybe be a separate app, which might be handy, but it would probably cost more.
Do you know, just I don't know if you know, Hugh, do you know if that's is it an Amazon Tennis and then you get all of it, or is it like pay-per-view per competition or per match?
I don't know exactly. I'm not a tennis guy, despite what a tweet I sent out today that's not very popular.
That went down like a lead balloon, I can tell you guys. You kind of sparked my interest there, because when we talk about format and TV, and we'll get kind of use this to segue into the format, the only major competitions I can think of that are of huge size are kind of the major leagues in America. You think of NFL, you think of NBA, very different league format. Like NFL is probably the closest to rugby in terms of how you could divide up games, and they're still playing like 7 at a time on a Sunday afternoon on, you know, 2 different broadcasters. And then
imagine Rugby Red Zone with all the tries.
Rugby Red Zone would be absolutely incredible. And I'd like to put my hand up here that I would present it. Thank you very much if you want someone. But no, they'd probably end up with someone who doesn't want to be there.
Kind of like what the top 14 does with the barrage, isn't it?
Yeah, they do. The last rounds of the season, they do like a split screen thing, which is unbelievable.
Oh yeah.
If only I could speak French and lived in France to be able to see it once. But as well as that, the EFL Championship came to mind, because that's 24 teams. Am I right, Hugh? The Championship in England.
Yes, that's right. I don't think every game in that is televised. No,
No,
it's
but
definitely not.
they have a streaming system that's kind of, you know, for various things. Like they all run one. I know there's obviously logistical issues, but that's kind of the point I was going to go on to, is if the URC did go, okay, right, we have URC TV. Every broadcast is just a TV broadcast, bar like 1 game a week. So like, how are they going to make that work? Do you know what I mean? URC TV works because someone else is showing all the games at the bare minimum. They're not doing the setup costs and all that. And these things make a huge difference. I know you would have probably talked about this on the Pirate Rugby pod with Enda. These things do make a huge difference when it comes into it. And it will make a big difference for format, because if you go with a 26 and pending team league, which way do you go with it? Do you want to have promotion relegation in some regards? So if a English Championship club, or maybe a Black Lions or someone like that, could they get in, and so on? Like, what would you say, David? I'll come to you first. Would you, or to you're ready to go?
All I was going to say is you can't have. I know the URC has been about growing and being open to things. You can't just invite everybody. You can't just say,
no, that's true.
And we'll have a bit of Black Lion as well, and we'll have Poland. Do they need a rugby team? And how about America? It needs to be a closed shop. And back to David's point about the Italians and the South Africans, a British and Irish league is a much easier sell than a British and Irish and also South African and also Italy.
Especially to the country who, like in England, there is that sense of people who are making the decisions. They're the most desperate and have the least amount of buying power. But historically, they had the most amount of buying power and still treated like such. So if they had a choice to be replacing the South African teams, they would take it in a heartbeat. Just there is kind of that counterbalance of it, dare I say. I don't know if that's the right way of putting it. But in terms of format, David, what way would you like to see them go? Because you could go conferences, you could go one big league, which would be just ugly, to be honest. Like, it's hard enough at 16 to kind of make it look right. So what way would you go?
Yeah, God, it is a tricky one. I don't know, when the numbers get up that high, you start to get to the point where like I think most leagues in rugby, I'm struggling to think of one that isn't. Most leagues in rugby aren't really leagues. They're, build up to knockout competitions. The only real way you could have it be a straight shootout with that many teams is if you had it be an actual league where there are no knockouts. You play however many games you play in the year, and then whoever's on top at the end wins.
And you wouldn't be able to play everyone twice, which is huge for like provincial matchups, regional matchups, etc.
Yeah, and like that's the one thing kind of the URC has kind of it made work even when it seems like it could have been a negative. I feel like they've made it be a positive because it means that you play the teams that are closest to you twice.
Yeah.
So and that makes all the sense in the world.
Unless you're Glasgow and you play the team that's literally quite furthest away twice.
Yeah, no, that's fair point. Yeah, no, that's a fair point. But like if you're, Munster or Connacht, you get to play each other twice, that beats the hell out of having to, go down to South Africa twice as often or whatever. So I think they've made that work as much. I don't know if it's that big a league. I think it is going to come down to a situation where it's either a league and it's a straight shootout and not everyone gets to play everyone twice, which I don't think is going to happen just because it seems to go against. I think rugby likes knockout games, and I think a competition without knockout games is a competition that's going to struggle to draw the eye. So I think the bigger it grows, the more likely it is to become a system of a two-tiered competition, which might not be the worst thing in the world, but the only way that can work is if the second tier is at least close to, if not as viable as the top tier.
And then that brings in the further question. If you're England, if you're, say, because Huw made a dig at me in his own podcast about me liking Bath, if you are, for example, a Newcastle, why would you vote for this when you're almost guaranteed to be in that second tier? I'm not saying it would be a vote because meritocracy in rugby isn't exactly something that, it's more of a once a generation type thing. But like, why would you? Because you're almost confined to it. Zebra be the same. Probably the Dragons, if we're being realistic.
But see, that's why I think it's reliant on some sort of guarantee. I have no idea how you would actually guarantee this because it's obviously based on cash flows to a degree. But I think it has to be based on the idea that if we're going down this route, then we're going down the route of thinking that if this is a two-tier competitions, tier 2 is as important as tier 1. Not as maybe there's obviously a bit more prestige winning tier 1 than tier 2. If you take the example of Europe with the Challenge Cup and the Champions Cup, everybody wants to win the Champions Cup. But God, if you gave, some teams the option to win a Challenge Cup, they bite your hand off. Everyone would prefer to take home silverware if they can. So if you could create a two-tier list where at least the teams at the bottom tier have an aspiration to win something and maybe work their way up to the top tier, that'd be great. But you would need to have some sort of really strong plan to have that second tier be as financially viable in terms of commercials, in terms of ticket sales, in terms of prize money or whatever, in terms of payoff financially. You would need to have that tier 2 league be as viable as the first, because like you said, other than that, there's a whole lot of teams that would never go for it.
And the smallest of small caveats that I could ever throw out, technically Munster won URC 2 when they won last year, and Stormers won URC 1 because that's how they decided to name those finals.
Is that how they're going? Cool.
Yeah. On kind of officially, but they're kind of not proud of it kind of way. So you can't really call it the second division URC 2 now. But you can, but
Oh yeah, I get you. Yeah.
This is kind of that side of thing. Huw, you're usually a good man for this side of stuff. What way would you go? And is there any way that you can solve this impasse in terms of playing teams twice, like your regional sides and your provinces, or the fact that you have to go to South Africa? And how do you manage that if the South Africans are split into 2 different teams and so on and so forth?
That's a good point. How can you play everyone twice if you're in different leagues? If one team's in the Premiership and one's in the Championship or whatever it's called, maybe you just have to bite the bullet. I mean, obviously in English football now it's arguably incomparable, but Newcastle United, my club's biggest rival Sunderland, are in the league below us and have been in the league below us or 2 leagues below us for several years, and we've just gotten on without that derby. And I think if you're playing English teams, that kind of necessity goes away a little bit, because going from Newport to Llanelli or going from Newport to Bristol, it's probably easier to get to Bristol because of the infrastructure in Wales. Now, that would be different in Ireland, obviously, and South Africa massively. So yeah, there's that question. In terms of a geographic guarantee of at least having one team in the Premier League, I'm keep calling it the Premier League, the top division. I don't know. We've just gotten rid of that in the URC for European qualification, so maybe that wouldn't be it. I should imagine there's quite a lot of people in English rugby who would assume that the top league would be 100% English teams, and they would get quite a nasty shock having to go play the Stormers away and then Leinster away and then Glasgow away.
Right, let's open the beers. How many English teams are going to actually win this new competition in the first 10 years? And why is it 0?
Only Saracens have a
Saracens,
chance.
yeah, it's just Saracens.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be your answer.
But I don't think they go to Leinster and win. I don't think they go to Stormers and win. So
true.
there you go.
It's going to be a great competition.
The current URC format actually works out for the countries that have got 4 teams. You only play 6 games outside your country. So you play your derbies, and then you've got half the games at home. So actually, you think about it being a big global league. You go, actually, we only play 6 games outside our country, and for some people, not everyone's got different budgets. For some people, one trip to a different country, especially if it's Ireland or Scotland, which isn't really a different country if you're in Wales. It is obviously a different country, but in terms of travel, it's not like going abroad.
Yeah.
It actually becomes, it's not actually that much of a nightmare when you think about it. And for a lot of Scarlets fans, love going to Italy once a year. It's a thing. So I don't know. I don't know if you can guarantee it. I think if you're going to go for a 2-tier structure, I think you can't guarantee derbies, and I wouldn't give a geographical guarantee. I would just let it be a meritocracy. But I would say maybe have 2 promotion relegation spots and an access style game like they have in France as well, rather than just have 1 up, 1 down like it was in England.
Yeah, you could do maybe top 4 and then kind of go from there. You did mention about the regional matchups and infrastructure. I would like to say I've never done the trip, but going from Galway to Belfast you'd be as well off probably flying to Heathrow and flying back sometimes. So there is a case to be made about the infrastructure issue. David, you were going to jump in there before I made my bad joke.
No, it's not a bad joke. The bad joke is Ireland's rail network.
They didn't.
to get a train from Aberystwyth to Cardiff, you change at Birmingham. So you go into a different country.
Jesus, yeah.
You can't get a train to Donegal in Ireland though either. So
actually, no. I've become familiar with the rail links to Wales lately because I'm planning my trip to Newport, as Kellen alluded to, flying to Bristol and getting I'm not getting the train. I'm getting the rail replacement bus.
That's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah. So that was just because I wanted to piggyback on something you said there, Huw, about you have 6 games. You only have 6 games abroad, and I think I didn't realize that until I started looking at getting tickets for away games. But that's been huge, because we have, I think it's 18. It's an 18 round season, and only 6 of them are outside of Ireland. And if you count, there's 2 in South Africa, which that's a big trip. Some people have made it, but that is a big trip. If you count that, you only got 4. You've got, this year, speaking for Leinster, we've got 1 in. I'm going to go to Glasgow at the weekend, and then we've got 2 in Wales, Newport and Cardiff, and then 1 in Parma in Italy.
Yeah,
and then the rest of them are in Ireland. It's
which is way more advantageous for Leinster fans than it is for the rest of it. It is
in terms of transport, but in general, that's the thing. If you want to take public transportation, but and not to take shit UK, but if you drove and you lived in Ireland, it's a cakewalk. It's not a big country, so it's I think that is a big selling point. If what you want is ticket sales, if that's what your focus is, and your focus is in getting away fans to go to games, because I think certainly if you look at places like, I don't actually know what the revenue is in France, but their big focus seems to be on home matches, and there's a huge variance in success rates between winning at home and winning away. so I don't know how much they have in terms of traveling support. But if your focus is on traveling support, then the way the URC is structured at the moment works quite well, unless you're from Glasgow or unless you're from Scotland or Italy. But
just quickly on Europe away support. I don't know what it's like in rugby, but I know in like La Liga in Spain, away support isn't a thing. Like I've been to a La Liga game and sat in the away end, and there's like as many British tourists there as there are away fans. Like away support is quite a British thing. It's not necessarily something that European nations do.
Yeah,
that's true.
I get that. Like I was even, sorry, can I just finish off? I was on holidays in Portugal there recently, and it was in a very nice town, but it was quite a small town. But they had this big stadium right there, and I was like, "Did they really fill this?" And it's like, "Oh yeah, everybody." But I was like, "Do you get enough people in like from or like away to go to that?" And it's like, "No, everybody just goes to it locally, and then whenever the team are away, wherever they're playing, everyone there goes to see it." So yeah, it's
it's a small country thing. The smaller the country, the more the away support is a thing.
Yeah,
because you can get there easier.
And I think that's probably why when it came to the World Cup, and you have countries that are bigger when it comes to football, like Argentina, like England, like France, and suddenly they see 60,000 Irish fans show up in the Stade de France for Ireland to play South Africa. They're like, where did these guys come from? I was listening to the rugby pod last week, and one of the guys was talking about being in, a decade ago, being in the Stoop when Munster came over to play, and it was entirely Munster supporters. And like, how did any of you get tickets? Where did you guys come from? So I think that is, I don't think that is necessarily as ubiquitous a thing as maybe some of us in Ireland think it is.
Yeah, that's true. Lads, we've probably gone over time, so we should probably leave it here. I will ask you one last question because the URC is back this weekend. David, I'll start with you. Who's winning the URC? And if you do say Leinster, I want you to give someone else in case they don't, because it's very safe pick.
Well, Leinster are going to win. I would imagine. I hope. I think I would hope that Leo Cullen, as smart a man as he is, and being from Dublin, I think he, knowing other Dublin people as well as I know myself, probably bought into the idea that he's slightly smarter than he is, will have learned his lesson and won't be going half-cocked into any games this season. That being said, World Cup hangovers are a thing. So if Leinster don't win it, I wouldn't be surprised if it's one of the South African teams. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the Stormers or the Bulls, particularly if they see big success in the World Cup. I think they could have a huge boost off the back of that.
Yeah. There. Huw, which way are you going?
Well, as we discussed on the Pirate Pod earlier, mate, I think you can predict who's going to finish top, but I think predicting the winner is much more difficult because it's because the playoff system is completely conceivable that someone who finishes mid-table could win it. I think Leinster will finish top, and my outside bet for winners are the Bulls because they've done some exciting recruitment over the summer.
Yeah, you convinced me on the Bulls, so they're going to be my outside bet. Obviously, I'd like to see Munster win, but going back to back in the league is basically something that doesn't happen unless you've been Leinster in the Pro 14 era, which is remarkable, but it's kind of been the case. Kind of because Leinster have dominated the league the last 15 years anyway, so they kind of jumped in there, but that's the way it is. Lads, thank you very much for coming on to this impromptu podcast. I did say back in August, I think it was, that we do more things like this and haven't done one since, even though the World Cup has been full of breaking news stories. But hopefully it won't be the last of the year, I suppose, at this stage. So to David, to you, thank you very much for coming on, and thank you to everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And why not, give us your thoughts on this new URC format. If it does come to be, it might even be 3 or 4 or 5 years away by the time we do get to see it. So as a great man once said, they only gave the URC 5 years, mate. 5 years. I don't think that's the case that it's going to unfold at this stage. So once again, thanks to David, thanks to you, thanks to everyone for listening. If you like what you see or hear, please do subscribe. And as always, I will have the links to the lads' pages and to my own social media down below. But for now, and until next time, until tomorrow night's World Cup preview podcast, take it easy.